sorry to the other callers. We're going to have to clean the phones out because it's on the gun issues and open the phones back up on comments on the economy, comments on what's happening in the world. Peter Schiff can speak to pretty much any of these issues. A smart cookie. Europac.com, billions under management. Of course, it is Peter Schiff. His father passed a few weeks ago over the other side and, of course, was a frequent guest on this show and a friend of mine before he was thrown in prison more than 11, 12 years ago. And he died basically as a political prisoner for a long time, basically denied medical care, then still chained down basically to the moment he passed. And it's just very, very sad. I can imagine how sad it is for Peter Schiff. So we'll speak about some of that up front because it's bigger than just Irwin Schiff. We're not just remembering a patriot that wrote best-selling books exposing the IRS and the Federal Reserve. Basically sounded like Ron Paul, and they put him in prison for it. And when Ron Paul was on with us 2 weeks ago, he was on with us yesterday as well, without me prompting, he brought up Irwin Schiff and said it's a real sign of how much danger this country's in. Then they had a bunch of publications like Media Matters, Right Wing Watch, you name it, make fun of Ron Paul. We have record numbers of whistleblowers in prison. We have record numbers of journalists in prison. Now a section of the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, came out. It's even worse than we thought. Arrest whistleblowers, journalists worldwide. I mean, this is getting bad. But it's okay because the so-called left can make jokes about it all day. And don't think when the right wing gets back in, the rhino types, they won't be just as bad. I've never seen liberals act like this. They just act so totalitarian. It's funny to them. Again, they made fun of Ron Paul in a bunch of publications. And with a straight face. Can you believe he says America is in a tyranny and is getting worse because, we put Irwin Schiff in prison? I mean, people say if a Nazi Germany came here, if Soviet Russia came here, or Alexander Solzhenitsyn got locked up, we'd do something about it. It can't happen here. Well, you know what? It is happening here. They put him in prison for writing books calling the federal government a mafia. And the judge said in the Las Vegas Review-Journal, I'll never forget, you're being put in prison because you were told last time not to write these books or sell these books. I mean, imagine being a judge saying, you can't put this book out in America, whether it was true or not. That's like Kevin Trudeau. I don't agree with some of the stuff in his books. I read several of them. Some of it was true, some of it wasn't. But if they can lock him up for writing natural cures they don't want you to know about, they can lock anybody up. But the case with Schiff, what he said was accurate. And then they said, we'll let you out of prison, or we'll keep you from going to prison. You just got to recant all this. Well, he wouldn't do it. And that's the stuff that legends are made of. So your dad's gone, but not forgotten and here alive with us. I know it's hard to talk about, but you eulogize your father beautifully, comparing, to like the end scene in Braveheart. It's true. In what you wrote there at Europac.com, we also posted it. A lot of other big sites posted it. But what would you like to say about your dad? I mean, you heard my rant about it. It really makes me sick, and it makes me angry.
Yeah, and, there was a lot of coverage. The New York Times did an obituary. Actually, The Economist has the back page of their magazine, an obituary to my father. But, one of the parts that bothered me about The Economist, and, the writer didn't even bother to call me or my brother or ask anything. Just, they just write the article. But if you look at the final paragraph, the inference is that, hey, my dad got revenge because he got to live out his final years, on the taxpayer. Like he got a nice place to live.
That's
and he
sick.
got free room and board and medical care. And I've even seen some other articles written from that perspective that, hey, he wasn't paying taxes, but all of us people who were supporting him in, the equivalent of an old age home, except better because, it was supposedly a country club type facility. Now, these people never actually visited my father. You had no idea the conditions under which he was living. It is not club fed. Maybe they used to have institutions like that a long time ago, but they don't have them anymore. And that's not where my father was. And the really bad part about it is, remember, he was moved from a relatively, low security facility, convenient to me and my brother and other relatives who could regularly visit him. And he was sent first to a facility in Indiana, in Terre Haute, and then to this one in Texas, in Fort Worth, because these were hospital-type facilities. My dad turned 80, and when he got to be 80, they said, okay, you need to be in these facilities that have this top-notch medical care because, you know, he's 80 years old and we really need to take care of him, and we can't do that unless we're in these certain facilities. And so on that basis, they moved him. Now, we didn't even want to move him. He didn't want to be moved. Nobody wanted to move him. We tried to intervene. That was one of the things that Ron Paul tried to help me with, is to try to get him back closer to us, but we could never do it. So he was there supposedly to get good medical care. They didn't even know he had cancer until 2 months before he died. 2 months before. And the cancer was so bad, it had spread all over his body from initially being, you know, a skin cancer, a melanoma on his head. But by the time they even knew he was sick, he was 2 months away from death. I mean, what kind of medical facility is that? I mean, you could see a guy who's out in the real world, who's stubborn, he doesn't go to the doctor, and then he finds out he's really sick, and he should have gone. My father is living theoretically in a hospital, in a prison hospital, yet they didn't know he was sick until he was on death's door.
That's just classic. I mean, they chop your legs off and give you a pair of crutches. But for me, Peter, it's that he is a classic political prisoner. He didn't do anything, and that tells me none of us are safe. It shows how sick the federal government is, how out of their minds they are.
Yeah, he is in jail. Look, they accuse him of violating various laws. It's not he's just in jail for writing a book, but of course, writing that book is one of the reasons for the severity of the sentence.
Well, they raised it. I remember the judge raised the book.
Yeah, well, the judge didn't have to give a 77-year-old man 14 years. I mean, there are people who have evaded lots of money in taxes, that get much smaller sentences than my father got. So that was to send him a message for his political stance and his exercise of his constitutional rights and freedom of the press and free speech. But in order to have been convicted of any of those crimes, the jury was going to have to be convinced, the government was going to have to prove that my father was willful, that my father actually believed what he was doing was wrong. And there was no evidence introduced at all to suggest that my father wasn't being sincere.
Well, I knew your dad pretty good, and at dinner, he was very entertaining and very smart, as you know. You couldn't get him to stop talking about this, and the proof, he was obsessed with it. He was a zealot. He totally believed it.
He didn't stop talking about it until he couldn't talk. The last time I spoke with him a few weeks before he died, that's all he could say. Right? He was talking about how he's in jail illegally and how he wants me to continue his legal battles on behalf of his estate for wrongful imprisonment. My father is still trying to win. He still somehow thought that he could get justice ultimately in a completely unjust system. I mean, my father always recognized the corruption in the courts, but for some reason he believed that eventually he could overcome that. He was so correct in what he was doing that the government would have no choice, or the judicial system would have no choice, and that ultimately he would prevail. And he believed that up until he died.
Well, like Ron Paul said here 2 weeks ago, it shows how far this country's fallen, what they did to your dad. I mean, if people don't have empathy and realize that could happen to any of us, something's wrong with them.
At most, it should have been civil. If the government thought my father was doing something wrong, it should have been a civil matter. You cannot turn the good faith exercise of a constitutional right into a crime. You can't put people in jail if they think the government is breaking the law. Because let's assume you think that my father was wrong. What about the next guy? What if the government really starts doing things that are wrong, assuming that they haven't already done that?
What if they arrest you for saying the NSA shouldn't be spying on you?
Yeah, look, it's the camel's nose under the tent. You cannot let the government imprison people who challenge what they're doing on the basis that what they're doing is wrong or illegal or unconstitutional.
A lot's going on, but I want to finish up the segment on your dad and other political prisoners. It really is scary to see him doing this and openly saying they want to restrict free speech now. Again, Drudge was here a few weeks ago, and he pointed out that he had dinner with a Supreme Court justice, and they said, no, the word is they're coming after the First Amendment. They're going to shut down websites, talk radio. And people say, oh, that'll never happen. Well, they said Obamacare would never happen. They have to try to shut us down because we are politically starting to wake people up.
Yeah, and remember, again, a judge banned him from selling his last book, The Federal Mafia. And, that is the only nonfiction book ever banned under any circumstances in the United States. And, there was only one other book that was banned, that it was, an erotic book. And so this is the only nonfiction. Of course, it's the last book that has been banned. But you know what? It might not be. There may be books banned in the future now that this very bad precedent has been set and unchallenged. Nobody seemed to care that the government banned this book. And if they can get away with banning my father's book, what other books are they going to get away with banning in the future?
I just can't believe I'm sitting here talking to you and they killed your dad. I think it's fair to say that. A political prisoner. They banned his book. And this isn't some dark satire science fiction movie. This is really going on, Peter.
Yeah, and look, this is the beginning. This is how tyranny, takes hold when people sit by and do nothing and they allow it to happen. They'll say, oh, he was just a tax protester. That's how everybody forgives it. Well, Erwin Schiff, well, he was a tax protester. As if being a tax protester means you lose all of your rights.
Well, George Washington was a tax protester.
Yeah, but if the government can strip you of your rights because you're a tax protester, well, they can strip you of your rights for any reason they have. So everybody is at risk when one person is at risk, and you can't just be complacent and excuse it. There is no excuse for what they did to my father.
Absolutely. Oh, but Wall Street doesn't get in trouble for the derivatives. Nobody goes to jail. They steal trillions of dollars, but Erwin Schiff dies. Well, you know what? He won in the end, though, getting the word out, and he's a hero. So you got to feel, how proud are you of your dad, Peter?
I've always been proud of him, but I wish he didn't have to die in those circumstances. But you're right. I think the government did elevate his stature to that of a martyr, and I think
they did. Stay there. Let's finish up. I'm sorry the other callers. We're going to have to clean the phones out because it's on without me prompting. He brought up Erwin Schiff and said it's a real sign of how much danger this country's in. Then they had a bunch of publications like Media Matters, Right Wing Watch, you name it, make fun of Ron Paul. We have record numbers of whistleblowers in prison. We have record numbers of journalists in prison. Now a section of the TPP, gun issues, and open the phones back up on comments on the economy, comments on what's happening in the world. Peter Schiff can speak to pretty much any of these issues. A smart cookie. Europac.com, billions under management. Of course, it is Peter Schiff. His father passed a few weeks ago over the other side, and of course, was a frequent guest on this show and a friend of mine before he was thrown in prison more than 11, 12 years ago. And he died basically as a political prisoner for a long time, basically denied medical care, then still chained down basically to the moment he passed. And it's just very, very sad. I can imagine how sad it is for Peter Schiff. So we'll speak about some of that up front because it's bigger than just Erwin Schiff. We're not just remembering a patriot that wrote best-selling books exposing the IRS and the Federal Reserve. Basically sounded like Ron Paul, and they put him in prison for it. And when Ron Paul was on with us 2 weeks ago, he was on with us yesterday as well, with